Welcome to the Clearly Christian Podcast with Dr. Cy Smith. It's time to know more so you can say no more. It's time for the Clearly Christian Podcast. Here's your host, Dr. Cy Smith.
I'm Dr. Cy Smith, and this is Clearly Christian, a podcast about what it means to see the world from God's perspective, and then the impact this has on training the next generation to live a life consistent with a biblical worldview. If you like the show, you've been listening for a while, I'd encourage you to hit the subscribe button or leave a review. That'll let others know the show's worth listening to and certainly help advance the cause of Christian education. So thank you again for being here. Our guest today is Dr. Kieth McDaniel. He's the superintendent at Shiloh Christian School in Springdale, Arkansas. Dr. McDaniel is the Arkansas State Rep for ACSI, and he's a member of the Arkansas Non-Public School Accrediting Association. He's been a teacher, a coach, and a principal throughout his career, while also serving in both the U.S. Army and the Air Force. His unique experience make him well qualified to speak to our topic today, and so I know you're going to enjoy our conversation. But first, let's go to school. Today, I need you to know more about what it means to live and lead in uncharted territory and unstable times. In his book, Canoeing the Mountains, Todd Bolsinger tells a fascinating story of Lewis and Clark in order to draw parallels to Christian leadership. In their incredible efforts to explore the West and find a water route that would connect the Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean, Lewis and Clark and their crew spent 15 months canoeing upstream, certain that a navigable river was on the other side of one last steep hill. As they finally reached the crest of the hill, what they saw, as far as the eye could see, were miles and miles of the largest mountains anyone had ever seen, the Rocky Mountains, of course. At that moment, everything about their journey changed. They had planned on exploring the West by boat, but now they were off the map in uncharted territory, and it was completely different than expected. They were experienced river rafters who had to learn to be mountaineers. Bolsinger asserted that for leaders, this story is the driving metaphor for our present moment in history. In every field, in every business, every organization, leaders are rapidly coming to the awareness that the world in front of us is radically different from everything behind us. After centuries of stability and slow incremental change, in less than a generation, our world has become volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. How will we chart the course where the future is nothing like the past? Well, his point is well made. I've been in leadership for over 30 years, and I can tell you we are certainly leading off the map in many ways. There is no precedent in our handbooks and policy manuals for some of the complex issues we face today. That's one of the reasons why leadership books continue to fly off the shelves, and competent leaders are so highly prized across every field. But as a professional educator, I can't help but think about the parallels here for our children as well. Today's students also live in a culture that's nothing like the past, and they often find themselves overwhelmed and distressed trying to make sense of what they see. Remember, this is known as the most anxious generation in history for a reason. When you're a young person living in a culture that bombards you with over 1,000 messages a day, and you have access to all the information you could ever want at your fingertips, and then you feel as if most adults don't really understand the world in which you live, now more than ever, you need a single reference point, something true that you can count on. This is where Christianity and Christian education have a distinct advantage. When we live and lead in uncharted territory as we do now, we must know how to establish true north, which is a single reference point that we can rely on, no matter what happens. Having the confidence to live according to what you know is right and true, to trust in a true north, that's a game changer. And this is what we want to discuss with our guest today, who's uniquely qualified to speak to this issue. Let me make 2 quick chalkboard points for you to consider remembering. First, for the leader in uncharted territory, you must recommit to your core values and be clear about your convictions. The focus here is on developing credibility because no one is going to follow you or trust you off the map unless they trust you on the map. And number 2, for the young person in uncharted territory, you must know how to establish true north. You must keep asking questions until you find real answers, answers that not only make sense, but are proven correct. Christian schools teach what is true north with confidence, knowing that everything that's true can be traced back to the mind of God. So now you know more. And like I say, when you know more, you can do more. You can not only think differently, but you can act differently and make that change and live out of your convictions and say no more if you must. So now let's put this lesson plan into action and welcome our guest again, Dr. Kieth McDaniel, Superintendent of Shiloh Christian School. Again, serves on the Arkansas Non-Public School Accrediting Association Board and the State Rep Field Director for ACSI. He's currently, again, uniquely serving his 17th year in the military, 13 of those in the Army, and then 4 now in the U.S. Air Force. Black Hawk helicopter pilot. I love that. We've become good friends through ACSI conferences through the years. He's received numerous awards and decorations, including a Combat Air Medal. So it's such a unique background that he brings to our experience today. He's got great training as well in leadership at Oxford and then also Harvard and a teaching certificate program. So again, all of my conversations with Dr. McDaniel have always been fascinating, and we're just, again, really excited to have him here on Clearly Christian. So Keith, thank you so much, brother, for joining us today. Nice to have you.
So excited to be here with you this afternoon, and I've really enjoyed getting to know you over the past few years through the RACSI connection and interaction together.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And for those of you who might be listening and you can't see us, you're really missing out here because Dr. McDaniel is fully geared out today because we're actually filming on a Wednesday, and that's his fly day because, like I said, he's active military. So in his office, in the school, with the kids and all the office personnel, he is decked out. I feel like I'm in a Top Gun scene right now, and I am just loving the feeling that we're getting on video.
Yes, normally this is not my general attire for the day, but as I talked to you earlier, had to fly a mission this morning, and so didn't want to miss this opportunity for the world. So you come as you are sometimes, and this is what my suit of the day was. So excited to be here.
That's so great. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks for bringing some real character now to the show instead of the customary coat as I'm always in. Well, I appreciate that. At what point did you get in your career? You were doing the military as well, and it sounds like you might have even done that, I don't even know, prior to education, or maybe they ran parallel. But at what point did you get to where you said, nope, I'm going to do both of these things, and I really do want to be a leader at a Christian school? How'd you make that journey?
Absolutely. So that journey started whenever I was young. My dad spent 39 and a half years in the military, so it was something that I was very familiar with. He was in the Air Force for his journey, and so as any typical teenage boy, I wanted to do something different than my dad, so I joined the Army, and so I started out my career as an enlisted soldier, so just a grunt, and so did everything from being a paratrooper to an air assault operator, and did various roles in those capacities, and then was really, really blessed with the opportunity to continue my education, further my education, and got picked up as an officer in the Army, and I actually had the opportunity to go to flight training for the Army, which is down in Fort Rucker, Alabama. So shortly after I married my wife, I took her from Arkansas and took her down to Southeast Alabama, and I got her on a military base there, and we spent about a year and a half there learning how to fly Black Hawk helicopters. And after that, had several deployments. We were in Iraq, Cambodia, Korea, Syria, Kuwait, Jordan, several different places. And so we had a lot of different experiences, a lot of learning. And and so really, really thankful for those opportunities. And then as I continued my education further through my master's and my EDS, I had to make the decision of what was I going to really do in my future. I had been a teacher and a coach in a parallel circuit with my military role. And here actually at Shiloh Christian School, I started out as an AP US history teacher, an AP world history teacher, and then became the assistant principal and then principal. And so I had the opportunity to become the superintendent here at Shiloh, but I had to make a choice if I was going to continue my role in the Army, which generally took me away quite a bit due to the deployments and stuff like that. And so my wife and I prayed fervently about it, and we decided that, hey, we're going to make the change from the Army to the Air Force. There was a pilot role down at Fort Smith, which is just a few hours down from where we currently live. And so I accepted that pilot position and the role of superintendent of Shiloh Christian School. The Air Force has been incredibly generous for allowing me to serve in the way that I do. Like I said, I fly every Wednesday and a couple of weekends a month, and then simultaneously I'm superintendent of Shiloh Christian School. And it's just really, really been an incredible opportunity for my wife and I and our family to to join in kingdom education together while being able to serve our country at the same time. So it's been an incredible journey.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, and kudos to both organizations, right, for making this balance happen. I mean, because from my perspective and having done this for years, I mean, what you're going to bring to the table in both of those roles, one feeding into the other, is just going to be invaluable. Because, I've been doing this, like I said, for decades now, over 3 decades. And so, one of the things that I have to remember is, to get outside of my school and this specific genre and make sure I still have objective eyes to see things the way they may need to be seen. Absolutely. Outside of our organization and get into other places. And so you bringing that to the table on a regular basis is pretty neat. Well, like I said, you're uniquely qualified to speak to today's topic. I love today's topic for you because this whole idea of being in uncharted territory, right, and leading off the map, as Bolsinger writes. I mean, this is right up your alley. So when you hear phrases like that and you say, "Yep, leadership in uncharted territory," what comes to mind and what kinds of things are you thinking of? Do you have any training in anything like this?
Absolutely, yeah. So throughout my time in the military, through different jobs, one of the things that kind of begins kind of cresting that concept of uncharted territory is as you become a young officer in the Army, you're constantly put into situations, they call them squad six lanes. And so what that is essentially combat scenarios that they put you in. And oftentimes they give you about 12 soldiers and a map and a compass. And basically they give you a mission, a commander's intent, if you will, that you're going to have to achieve. And so you're going to have to take certain raw materials that they give you and to be able to execute in a certain timeline with those soldiers that are in your trust, essentially, into an area that you haven't been. And so absolutely we had it there. And then additionally, as I continued my career, I was put into what's called SEER school. So Survive, Evade, Resist, and Escape school. So we went through SEER Level C school in our Blackhawk training. And so what that is basically is just that. You start out the school learning about how to survive, how to evade, how to resist, and how to escape. And then after you learn the processes in the schoolhouse, they actually let you have the opportunity for practical application. And so they so kindly put a black hood over your head and then drive you around in the back of a van for about 45 minutes and then dump you off in the woods with a map and a compass. And so you have to be able to navigate in an area that you have no clue where you are and achieve certain objectives along the way in that. And then additionally, obviously being a pilot, flying and being able to interpret terrain in a map and utilizing now obviously we have a lot of GPS capabilities, but we still have a compass in the aircraft and we still do utilize it. But yeah, that is something that is really near and dear to my heart. And so to kind of talk about that a little bit, the way I view a map, right? Maps are generally complicated in nature, right? They're intricate and ironically out of date almost the moment they're printed because of how fast the world changes currently. And what I challenge parents to think about, our administration to think about, our staff to think about is we have to think about our school as that map. We're here to serve as a structure ultimately that provides knowledge, clarity, boundaries, a known reference point for students. Because education is ever changing and similar to a map in the fact that education is simply out of date as soon as you establish anything, right? Education is ever changing. However, as we all know, there are, especially in faith-based education, there's absolute truths that remain similar to a map, that kind of known reference point in our faith-based schools. So, for example, our pedagogy, our methodologies may change, but where we base truth never will. So our doctrine, our canon of scripture remain pure and ultimately steadfast. And so to kind of further elicit that point, so we have the map, but also we have the compass, and you almost can't have one without the other, right? So a compass, we have to view it as our student's soul, right? So that's what I challenge our staff to think about. I give each one of our staff members a compass, right? Just so that they can think about that we are holding our student's soul in our hands, essentially, as we are defining how we are engaging in kingdom education. So what we have to understand, though, about a compass is a compass must always be trued. And if you think about it, so does a person's soul. So it must be reconciled with a known reference. And so if you think about it, a map, right, they're always orientated to the true north, which is a fixed point. So true north is a fixed point. A compass will always align north but it's aligned to the Earth's magnetic field rather than what true north is. So the difference between true north and magnetic north is ironically called declination. So for example, here in Arkansas where we live, our declination is about 4.5 degrees off of what true north is. And in different places in the United States, you can go up to about 21 degrees off in declination. So that means if I take my compass and I make no corrections whatsoever, I will never actually reach true north. So you can't get there on your own without any correction. So it's the same in life, and that's what I challenge our teachers with, is our sin causes declination from our true north, which is ultimately our faith, right? So therefore, an input has to be made to keep our students and ourselves on the right track. And so the same is just in true in our lives in general, not only in the educational setting. So no matter how hard we try to do what's right and do things on our own accord, we'll inevitably be off course if we go on our own accord. So we need a known point, a reference, so a map, right? And here in the school, we view our school as that map. The teaching provided here in these walls of our schools. And it provides an opportunity and a place for our students to look back to actually reference and reconcile against as they leave these walls. So a person's compass is inevitably going to be tainted, right? So by this world, we're all of us are going to have our true north challenged, if you will, based on our own biases, our own traits, our own upbringings, where we live, where we go to church, who we're married to, who our friends are, what we listen to, etc., right? So they all impact how much pull we allow to have on our north arrow, right, of our compass. So how do we true our compass? So it has to be consistently trued and reconciled against that known reference I've talked about. And for us, that's the gospel. So the gospel is interwoven into who we are, especially in faith-based schools such as yours and mine. We must present the gospel in a way that pierces our students' soul so much that his word is ultimately hidden in their heart, hidden in their soul. And his truth has the opportunity to ultimately guide their internal compass so that he can true them to his word. So this emphasizes the need of our own spiritual health, right? Our own spiritual journey, because if we aren't leading in our functional areas spiritually, we aren't really leading, right? We're simply following. So we must lead from an overflow, not from the draw. So why does all this matter? Why am I even speaking to this? So we have to understand that our students won't always have their map, right? They're not always going to have Shiloh Christian School, right? They're not always going to have the school that they're at, right? But they will always have their compass because they always have their soul. That is why our time with these students in these faith-based educational platforms are so critical and so paramount. We have a finite amount of time with them to make a lasting impact. And ultimately, that's what fires me up about faith-based education, is that opportunity to really try to true these students' souls and these students' compasses, and providing a framework and a reference for these students to look back to know what is right as they enter the world outside of our school and they enter the college and the workforce, and their beliefs and their values are challenged. They have a place to know what's right and a value system that they can look to measure anything they hear against, if that makes sense.
Yeah, right. Right, good. All right, great. That's a lot to unpack there. And what Bolsinger says, of course, when it relates to leadership, is saying, hey, we don't have a map right now for where we're at because, like I said in the intro and that analogy, we're just off it. There's nothing there. And what you're saying, of course, is, yeah, we're training students, and we need both the map and the compass, because like you said, we're going to need a roadmap for where you're going that has that single reference point, that true north. But you're also going to need that compass, which, if I understand you correctly, is something internal. Sure. You referred to it as the soul. And so you're saying, hey, this compass is where I know down deep where I live the most, this is the direction I need to be going. I may not specifically know how to get there, but I do know this is right. Sure. I have a sense of what's right. And so then I'm going to look to the map that the school provides, maybe for this specific. Am I summarizing that accurately?
Absolutely. And the school, and the way they provide that opportunity is ultimately through the gospel, right? So the whole goal is in faith-based education, obviously, is to be a partner with the parents and the students in their own faith journey. And so by our educational courses, our leadership programs, and everything like that we all provide, is essentially we're providing them a biblical worldview to look at and to look through, a lens to look through, if you will, that they can utilize once they leave us. And ultimately, that's what that internal compass is. It's what impacts their soul as they go out and view the world and see the world and look. They are measuring the world against what they know, right? And so what they know is what has been taught not only at the school, but what's been taught in their home and in their church before they're launched out into this world.
Yeah, I like what you said there, because they're not always going to have that map. And you have literally a big, clear map when you're little, and it gets more complicated as you work up through, so to speak, that map in elementary school and early childhood, here, do this, go here, here's the answers, A and B equals C, and it's all pretty laid out for you. Then it gets more complex and it gets more challenging, and then you graduate, and a lot of times you lose that. And that's where that compass really kicks in. Right. And if that good, like you said, that foundation hasn't been laid and they don't have that internal conviction of where to go, and that's where Bolsinger makes that note. It's not a time where you throw out your convictions. It's a time where you understand them even more, because you may not be quite as clear. And so that's really, like you said, that's really where a Christian school, at least for the moment in time that we have them, can really help out those parents. What advice then do you have for parents in this regard who may be listening and saying, ooh, boy, compass and map, this is going to be a little bit challenging, but how do I grab a hold of that as a mom and dad, and how do I focus on compass issues? What have you tried to do even in your home, or what advice do you have for parents?
So I think truly, Si, it's all about environment. It really, really is. So my wife and I, for example, we made the decision for us to both be in faith-based education, right? Our conviction as parents was that the world is what it is, and that's something that's outside of our control. So we're going to focus in on what our personal convictions are and the things that we can control. And so for us, that was putting ourselves and posturing ourselves in a way that we could afford the opportunity for our children to be a part of faith-based education. And so for us, what that looks like, we're both in education. My wife was in public school teaching. I was a teacher as well at that time. And so once I got into faith-based education, I absolutely fell in love with it and knew from that point forward, that's exactly what I wanted for my child, because I had the conviction on my heart that it's my responsibility as a father to give my kids the best shot they can have in being successful in life. And where I find that success and name that success is a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And so we have completely adjusted our entire life around that. It's kind of the age-old thing, you take your first job and you get to pick your second job. And so we're picking our second job by being here at Shiloh Christian School based on what we believe and our convictions. So what I'd encourage families to think about in that is you have to define as a family what is success, what it means the most for you in your life, and what do you want ultimately for your children. And you have to establish that. And then you have to make the hard decisions of actually adjusting your life accordingly. And that's where it gets really, really tough. And where I encourage you is to find an educational environment that aligns with your own spiritual and value structure that you have as a family unit. Because whenever you can send your student to a school for 6, 7, 8 hours a day, and they're hearing like-minded teaching and values, and then whenever the student gets home, they hear other consistent teaching and values from you at home, that is where learning really does occur. Norms are established, and when they start to engage and start to experience things that are outside of those teachings, then it's going to seem odd or different rather than what they're experiencing the 6 to 7 hours of the day that will arguably become normal to them, that you can see and experience in some public or governmental schools. Then whenever they experience it out in the world, it now doesn't seem odd or different. It seems normal. And that's where it gets gray and it gets a little scary for parents. So I just encourage you that it's really, really important to find alignment in the environment that you want to raise your students in with the values and belief structures that you have for the greatest long-term success. And my whole philosophy has been, if you want to change the future, you have to change the dinner table, right? So you have to understand that we're going to come together at that dinner table in alignment, and we're going to change everything that we do based on those conversations and what we actually want.
Yeah, I love that. You heard it here first, folks. If you want to change the future, you have to change the dinner table. Yeah, great line. Appreciate that. And what that sounds like to me, of course, is intentional parenting. And we've talked about that on this show with a couple of other guests, I believe, back in the fall. And that's exactly what you're describing is what are the goals? What do I want to happen? Instead of just reacting to the culture and saying, well, I'm just going to take what it gives me and see how this plays itself out, and I'll deal with today's crisis, whatever that may be, as it comes. Taking a whole different proactive approach to parenting, as Collins would say. Is it Collins or no? Covey would say, begin with the end in mind, right? Where do you want to be? And that's such a great, military ideology as well, right? Because that just drives that behavior. Yeah, great thoughts. Bolsinger also talks about this idea of the importance of trust for leaders. And you heard me say that no one's going to follow you on the map unless they trust you, or off the map unless they trust you on the map, rather. Do you think that holds true for students as well? How important is it that students know that they can trust what they're learning is true, and then also who they're hearing it from? Have you found that to be the case in your experience? Like, how can I really know what you're saying is true? How important is that to them? And then also, can I trust this teacher or this principal?
Yes, absolutely. I think now more than ever, trust is the differentiator, right? So that concept is ultimately exacting. And what I mean by that is trust is the singular differentiator, whether a person absorbs and applies what you're actually going to say. And so I think this kind of got accelerated with the information age that we live in, because just the ability for students to look up anything at any moment, right? So students can search for truth that fits the narrative that they want to accept, right? Or rather than what's actually true based on what is divinely inspired, or what we want to teach within our schools in terms of a value set. So yeah, absolutely. I think trust is going to be one of the most important things for not only administrators to develop, but parents to develop also with these students. And kind of to expand on that a little bit, I think for parents, a little piece of advice with that is ultimately you can't change technology, right? You can't negate the concept that technology is here. It just is. The speed of exposure for students to content and information is just going to be continually profound. We can limit where we can, but ultimately they're going to get engaged with the world, and they're going to get engaged with technology. But I think one of the ways that you can establish trust with students is going back to what we talked about briefly for a moment earlier, was establishing the norms. So one of the things that I challenge some of our younger families to do is talking about letting kids fail. And that sounds odd to pair up with trust, but I have a reason why I'm going to say that. I talked to our 5th and 6th grade parents about truly letting our kids fail, letting the students forget their homework, right? Letting them forget their shorts for practice. And there's a reasoning why behind that. I know from being a teacher and a coach, for example, I had a student one day that he forgot his football shorts, right? And, or football pants. And so, I go out there, and he's in 7th grade. I'm coaching 7th grade football at the time. And it is a hot Arkansas, just swampy August day. Okay. And, he did not, bring his appropriate gear. And so he didn't want to practice. And I said, well, why in the world wouldn't you practice? And he's like, well, I don't have my football pants. So I was like, well, what'd you wear to school today? Well, I wore jeans. I said, well, wear your jeans. And he looked at me like I was crazy. And so anyway, he put on his jeans, and he goes out there and practices football in about 109-degree temperature for about an hour. And what's interesting is that student never, ever forgot pants again. And my point in saying that to parents is you're going to go in and try to rescue your student, right? And it's generally based on your own insecurities. You want to save your child from that embarrassment, or the embarrassment ultimately on you because of a lack of preparation on your own part that impacted your student, right? But the problem with that is ultimately the lesson never gets to be learned. And believe it or not, often we can engage in some trust issues with that. And so Dr. Andrew Huberman, he's from Stanford. He's a neuroscientist, and he has a lot of different studies that I find very, very intriguing. But he talks about the concept of uncomfortable focus and the need for stress to create a neurological response to actually impart learning. And so that fired me up whenever I started to read that and get into his studies. But But one of the things that he talks about is with parents in this generation, one of the things that we struggle with the most is just kind of this comfortable parenting, right? And some of them we can argue is my parents raised me in X way, and I wanted to be different from them, right? However, what we're finding is that students are not understanding how to manage stress, and therefore there becomes some trust issues with mom told me this or dad told me this, but my circumstance is dictating something a little bit different. So what I mean by that is he's saying that as a student learns, whether it be circumstantially or in the classroom, there actually has to be a certain level of stress imparted for real, true, long-term memory learning to occur. And so I thought that was pretty interesting because it's the exact same thing that we're taught in flight school, right? For example, if my instructor pilot came to me and was like, hey, Kieth, if this fits within what you want to learn or what you're kind of feeling today, just look over this emergency procedure. You might encounter it at some point. You might not, but, it might be something just good for you to look at, and I'll be, okay, well, I might take a look at it or I might not, or, I'll get to that eventually. I have some other things that are a little bit more important at the time. Well, as you and I both know, is our emergency procedures in an aircraft, namely a helicopter, are extremely really important because if you haven't figured out with helicopters, there's no ejection seat. So if there's ever an issue, you get to ride it all the way to the ground. So our instructor pilots took a little bit different tact whenever they taught us things that we absolutely had to remember long term, right? So there was an immense amount of stress put on us. But what's interesting for what Dr. Huberman talks about is whenever you have imparted stress and a student can find success in that and you do it on a consistent basis, it's actually one of the best stress management tools that you can ever teach them, because what happens is they learn how to actually manage their own emotions, their own thoughts, their own stress, essentially. And so whenever hard things happen, they can think more clearly, they can adapt as needed, they can engage in whatever the situation is with clear thinking. And so it's the same way for us as with being pilots, is we have to be able to process a large and vast amount of information really, really quickly, because how fast we're traversing the ground, right, in the air. And so we have to be able to process very, very quickly. So we don't have time to operate in situations that are the best for us. We have to be able to operate based on things that we've actually learned. And so I just challenge our parents that generally, if you allow a kid's life to be too comfortable and not actually have to feel those moments of embarrassment or actually have to truly do the task, whatever it may be, you really run into a trust or stress issue. And then whenever something does happen that's difficult in life, are they going to actually look to you in that moment to follow? And that's a really important concept to understand. And I'll be honest with you, this has even impacted how I think about education in the classroom. I have limited some of our collaborative projects and stuff like that in the classroom, because for us, we're a college preparatory school. So at the end state, our goal is to get students into college. And so right now, the ACT, the SAT, and the other different college entrance exams are still a barrier for their future. And depending on which school you're going to go to, those marks can be significantly high. And so far, they don't let us collaborate on any of those exams. And same thing with the MCATs or the bar exam or anything like that. And so my point in saying this and stressing this to our teachers is at the end of the day, we've got to produce these students that are actually able to perform real tasks in real situation when real things are on the line. And for example, their future, right? And some of those scores really, really matter. And so how do we develop that trust with them? We've got to put them in uncomfortable situations prior to going into those big exams or those big situations, and not relying on their friend or their buddy to be able to fill in the gap, if you will, on some of their own areas in which they're more weak. And so it allows us to expose those weaknesses more early, and it is uncomfortable and we don't like it. But what happens is it's kind of like what I talked about earlier. It's exacting. It gets to the root of the issue, and we can deal with it in an environment where we care about them, we love them, we know them by name, and we can address those things prior to actually having to execute. So it helps them build trust for us. So I think that kind of helps impart the concept that he's trying to bring forward as well.
Yeah, it's a fascinating point. I don't think I've ever heard anybody articulate it that well in terms of the relationship between stress and trust, in that, stress can actually be an accelerator of trust, and we can use it to our advantage, and to some degree. And I think as adults, we would certainly agree with you. Some level of stress is just fine. That's life, right? That's normal. We hear often about how anxious and stressed out and overwhelmed this generation is. And most adults look at them and say, yeah, I understand that to a degree. But then there's also a degree to which we say, I just don't get that overwhelming level of stress, because that just seems like life. And so we try to help them navigate that as best we can. And we sometimes say, well, we got to help you deal with this, because you are going to be stressed out, if that's indeed the case, the rest of your life, because that's very, very normal. And I think all of us can relate to being put in situations where we've needed to learn something in a crunch situation, just like you were saying, the helicopter, and if this goes down, right, this is a matter of life and death. And ours aren't usually that, but there's that big exam in graduate school perhaps, or something that's on the job training that you've got. It doesn't matter what your career in. You've got a big presentation. They want you to do a PowerPoint in front of the CEO, whatever it is, and they've given you no time to prepare or less than adequate resources, and you're under great duress to learn something fast. And that stress, like you said, biologically, man, those pistons are firing in your brain, and you are all in. You have shut out everything else. You're not, the TV's off, the radio's off. You are locked in on what it is you need to learn as an adult in that situation, and your stress level's high, and you say, man, I got to get this. There's no going back. And then you knock it out, you learn it, and you just do whatever it takes, and you learn, how you learn best, of course. And so, yeah, it's fascinating that, we need to do that even with kids. And like you said, even to approach that from a trust angle, that's really fascinating. And again, once again, you're the perfect, I think, administrator to talk about this, because when kids see you and they know your background and they know what you and your team are bringing to the table, especially in the military, I mean, for right or wrong, the military just exudes trust in our society, because how can you not, right? I mean, it's, again, most of what you're dealing with is a situation of life and death. And I know not everybody in the military is maybe an upright, morally honorable person the way you and I would think of them in the Christian sense. However, there's a trust element that is so pervasive to the military that it cannot be any other way. Right. And so when they look at my administrator, Dr. McDaniel, and they look at people in the uniform, they have to think, okay, here's somebody I can trust, because he lives this direction and lives this way. So great stuff. He also talks about in the book the importance of your adaptive capacity. And I wanted to touch on that just briefly. In other words, that ability to adapt to this ever-changing culture, and knowing that this is going to be crucial, especially for the leader in this time. But as I said, doesn't mean you're going to change your core values and convictions. On the contrary, you're going to be more committed to those, though. But it does mean you might have to reframe your strategy to discover some new possibilities, because you're dealing with, again, a very different time. But how does that play out for you as a leader at Shiloh? Would you agree with what he's saying? Hey, I got to stay true to the core, but I've also got to be adapting to these ever-changing times.
Absolutely. So I think any leader that's actually had to lead any organization, lead any group of people that are going towards a common goal, I think that they would have to resoundingly say yes. However, to his point, though, is your core values can never change. Your belief structure can never change, and so that whole concept is actually one of our 5 non-negotiables of leadership at Shiloh, specifically the school that I'm at. One of those non-negotiables is prepare for existential flexibility. And so the concept is you have to fight rigidity and pride. So what I always challenge our team with is just to understand that the world is ever changing. With the information age that we're in right now, it can literally change in a moment. How we engage these students, how we get into their world, how do we even with parents, I'm seeing younger and younger parents, their modes of communication, their preference in communication, the expectations in the classroom, what they want to see as an end product, all those things change. And so what I've really doubled down on with our staff is we basically teach some fundamental factors, and we stay within those concepts, and we basically adjust based on those concepts. And I can expand on that a little bit if you want me to go into that. but I'll tell you the 5 non-negotiables of leadership are that. I'll touch on them briefly here, but number one, I always challenge our staff is this: we have to advance the just cause, which is our mission. Number 2, we have to build trusting teams, which is our staff development and hiring. We have to study our worthy rivals, dig into our competition, and find an advantage. Number 4 is that prepare for existential flexibility, so fight that rigidity and pride, and demonstrated courage to lead. And so this is a little bit more coarse language I use with my staff, but demonstrated courage to lead. So I challenge them: don't be a coward in a world of spineless people. And so we're in a world right now that are not tied to a group of people that are not tied to values and convictions and belief structures that are based on truth. So they're very moldable. And so I challenge our staff is you have to be able to adapt, but don't ever let your mold be adjusted outside of our values and our core beliefs. And so that has been a really, really helpful tool as well for us in that concept. But I completely agree with him. I think he's spot on.
Yeah, that's great. I think our listeners would probably love a copy of those 5 leadership lessons as well, because those do sound like they were taken from the military playbook and adopted for schools. They're so good, using words like courage and core values. And again, I feel like now I've moved from Top Gun to what's that other movie with Tom Cruise? It's one of my favorites, where he plays the attorney in the Navy. I can't think of the name off the top of my head. Yeah, that's such a good one as well. Few Good Men. Yes, exactly. So now I feel like we're using some of that language as well, right. Operating in the code and the core and things like that. Great stuff.
And some of the things we've done with our staff within that too, just to kind of expand briefly on that is like I started this year out. This is one of the things that I was convicted with on my heart, but there's a quote by William Penn. I was a history teacher before, so you kind of have to bear with me on that. But there's a quote that he said that's always resonated with me, but it kind of came to the forefront of my mind as we kind of lean into the world that we currently are in. So it's this: that buildings that lie so exposed to the weather need a good foundation. And so what I've challenged our staff with, and I think this can be very applicable to families, anybody, any other organization that's tied to values, or even with your students at home. But I challenge our staff 3 things. Number 1, we have a mindset. Okay. So we have a mindset, a mantra, and a mission is the mentality that I gave. So we have a mindset. So we're kingdom focused. We have a bias towards action, and we think like owners. So number 1, so kingdom focused. So we have to live out our mission, our core values, and be who we say we're going to be. We have to have a bias towards action. And if you know me, and anybody that's been around me very long knows that I like to operate very fast, very efficient. So I challenge our staff: listen, I'd rather you fail in action than fail being passive and understanding that timing's everything. So I challenge them: I'd rather you have 80% of the information and execute in the right timing than have 100% of the information and execute in the wrong timing. The next piece is think like an owner. So is this someone else's problem or mine? So who pays the price for my performance? So that's the kind of thing that I challenge them to think with. Number 2, we have a mantra. So I say the thing that we're really coining at our school is every encounter counts. Okay. So the little things aren't little, right? It's all about relationships and unreasonable hospitality. If you haven't read that book, it's incredible. But I challenge them with this concept, with that every encounter counts, is that relationships will keep our walls full, but rigidity, recognition, and rigor won't. And so that is the kind of the mentality that we have that in how we engage in people in the hallways and parents and everything like that. And then lastly is just simply our mission. So our mission is to develop godly leaders who engage their culture and changes. So our job is to develop, lead, and engage. And so those are the things that we utilize, kind of that same vein that Bollinger was talking about. But that's how we kind of develop our staff and utilize that same concept of flexibility, but holding to some very key and core things. So again, from us, we had to have a mindset, a mantra, and a mission to be able to do that.
Yeah, I love that. And I love this idea that you just mentioned there too, because I think people might get the wrong idea of your leadership and just some of the, just given some of the words that you're using, saying, wow, this guy probably not real flexible, not real relationship oriented, sounds like he's by the handbook, kind of that military, sure. Hey, it's always going to be this, blah, blah, blah. But then you said, no, that's not going to work. It's relationships. I believe you used the other words of recognition and rigor. And I can't remember what the third R was there, but he said, no, those rigidity. Yeah. Those things, right. What I just talked about, those things will not get it done. Relationships will get it done. So here you are, breathing into this culture, a lot of that military influence, but yet also saying, no. to get to the heart of a child and to really get where we need to be, the relationship is what's going to matter, and not the rigidity, not the rigor, and not some of those other things that all often get in the way. So I love that, and I love the idea too of the owner mindset. We talk a lot about that around here as well, because that owner mindset is a key to longevity and success, in our relationships. Well, again, fascinating discussion. I have a feeling that some of our listeners are going to want to know a little bit more about Kieth McDaniel and or Shiloh Christian. They might even have some other questions for you too as well, and I'll touch base with them also and see how the feedback comes in online. And if they want to do and know more about this, we'll come back with a second conversation. But if they want to get in touch with you, or if they want to know more about your ministry or Shiloh Christian, what should they do? Where should they go?
Absolutely. If they want to know anything more about it, my email is Kieth M, so Keith M at shilohsaints.org. So SHILOH Saints, SAINTS.org. And feel free to reach out to me, and you can always look us up on our website at shilohsaints.org and learn more about our school there. We're really, really blessed to have a great organization, great group of people to operate with. And so we're really, really thankful for what God's entrusted us with and where he's taken our school.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, fascinating. And I hope that those of you listening and watching, you've been able to really pick up on this. Just, again, the unique nature and the unique experiences that Dr. McDaniel brings to the table here to really speak into this issue of leading and living in uncharted territory, and how we try to do that in Christian schools, and how we try to not only direct them to what true north is, but help them get a sense for that so that they can internalize that and then live that out moving forward, leading long after they've left our school. So, Dr. McDaniel, thanks so much for being here today. And thank you again for joining me on our show, Clearly Christian. I trust that now you know more about the importance of true north and what it means to live and lead in uncharted territory and unstable times. Again, if you like the show and you've been listening, hit the subscribe button, leave a review, and again, let others know the show's worth listening to. That would certainly make a difference, and I certainly would appreciate that. Remember, as I say every episode, the only way we're going to turn things around in our country is to increase the number of people who hold a biblical worldview and who live that out. And I firmly believe, and I think Dr. McDaniel would agree, the greatest hope we have to get there is Christian education. So thank you again. This is Dr. Cy Smith for Clearly Christian.
Thank you for listening to the Clearly Christian podcast with Dr. Cy Smith. Hear more episodes at clearlychristianeducation.com. If you'd like more information about Christian education in your neighborhood, or if you're interested in education opportunities at Mansfield Christian School, or if you agree with Dr. Smith and want to help him in his mission to influence and awaken Christian America, you can send Dr. Smith an email through the clearlychristianeducation.com website. Message him on the Clearly Christian LinkedIn or Facebook page, or call the Clearly Christian Connection line at 419-756-5651. This has been the Clearly Christian Podcast with Dr. Cy Smith on clearlychristianeducation.com, brought to you in conjunction with Mansfield Christian School, a Bryan Media production.